I'm Ethan Cross, 48 years old, and for most of my adult life, I've believed that the loudest people in a room usually know the least about how things actually work. That's probably why the day a luxury homeowners association tried to ban my propane trucks from driving through their gates didn't make me angry nearly as much as it made me curious. They looked at 6 tanker trucks and saw noise, diesel smoke, and an inconvenience. They never stopped to ask who was keeping every fireplace, heated driveway, and gourmet kitchen in their million-dollar neighborhood alive through a Wyoming winter. And that little mistake ended up costing them far more than a few quiet mornings. I run a family propane distribution company outside Redridge, a mountain town where winters don't politely knock before arriving. They kick the front door in. My father started the business with one rusty truck 40 years earlier, and by the time I took over, we serviced ranches, cabins, restaurants, ski lodges, and pretty much anyone who preferred staying warm over proving a point. It wasn't glamorous work. You woke up before sunrise, checked valves, inspected hoses, signed delivery logs with frozen fingers, and spent half your day driving roads most tourists were too scared to touch. But it paid the bills. People trusted us. And in small towns, trust is worth more than advertising. Across the highway from our storage yard sat a development called Eagle Summit Preserve, 43 enormous mountain homes built for people who loved telling everyone they had escaped city life while demanding every luxury they left behind. Heated patios, outdoor kitchens, stone fire pits, wine cellars, automatic snowmaking driveways. If someone invented a way to spend money on comfort, those houses probably had it. Their HOA president was a man named Grant Holloway, a former investment executive who wore pressed jackets, even when everyone else wore flannel. The first time I met him, he shook my hand without actually looking at me. He looked past me instead, staring at one of my trucks like it had personally offended him. "You know," he said, brushing imaginary dust off his sleeve, "these trucks really ruin the atmosphere around here." I laughed because I thought he was joking. He wasn't. Over the next few months, I started hearing stories. Residents complained about engine noise. Someone complained our drivers waved too loudly at children. Another insisted diesel exhaust somehow lowered property values. My drivers found it hilarious. "What's next?" my foreman Jake joked one morning. "They're gonna file a complaint because the mountains cast too much shade?" We laughed and got back to work because people with real jobs don't usually have time to argue with people inventing problems. Then one Tuesday morning, everything changed. One of my drivers called me from the entrance to Eagle Summit. "Boss, they've got security blocking us." I drove over expecting a misunderstanding. Instead, I found 2 guards standing beside a brand new sign bolted into decorative stone. "Commercial vehicles over 8,000 pounds prohibited. HOA safety regulation." One guard handed me an envelope with my company's name printed across the front. Inside was a formal notice stating that all commercial delivery vehicles exceeding the new weight restriction were prohibited from entering community roads. Violations would result in a $1,000 daily fine along with possible civil action for roadway damage and noise violations. I actually read it twice because it was so unbelievably stupid. "Who's behind this?" I asked. The younger guard shifted awkwardly before answering. "Board decision, sir." Right on cue, Grant walked out of the clubhouse carrying a coffee cup like he'd been waiting for me to arrive. "Morning, Ethan," he said with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Nothing personal. Residents voted for a quieter community." "Interesting," I replied. "How do you expect people to receive deliveries?" He shrugged. "Figure something out. Smaller vehicles, maybe." I looked behind him at homes worth several $1,000,000 and then back at one of my 30,000-pound propane tankers. "You ever seen 9,000 gallons of propane delivered in a pickup truck?" He smiled again. "Not my problem." That's what stuck with me all afternoon. Not my problem. People throw that phrase around when they believe they're holding all the cards. I drove back to the office without raising my voice, without threatening anyone, without even calling my attorney. Jay kept waiting for me to explode. Instead, I poured stale coffee into a mug that probably should have been retired years earlier, sat down in the records room, and started opening file cabinets. My office manager, Linda, watched me dig through old contracts. "Looking for something?" she asked. "Yeah," I answered. "I'm looking for what Grant forgot to think about." She smiled because she'd worked beside me for 18 years and knew exactly what that tone meant. Whenever I got quiet, somebody else usually ended up nervous. I pulled service agreements going back 5 years, delivery schedules, inspection reports, equipment maintenance logs, and county lease paperwork. Around 8 that night, I found myself staring at a map I'd seen dozens of times before. Except this time, one tiny detail jumped off the page like someone had highlighted it in bright red. I leaned closer, checked the parcel number again, then opened another folder to confirm what I thought I was seeing. A slow grin spread across my face. Linda noticed immediately. "You found it, didn't you?" she asked. I nodded without taking my eyes off the paperwork. "Yeah," I said softly. "I think Mr. Holloway just declared war, without realizing whose ground he's standing on." I spent the next 2 hours digging through every contract my father had ever insisted we keep. And if you had walked into that office, you probably would have thought I was preparing for an audit instead of a fight with an HOA. The difference was I wasn't looking for paperwork to defend myself. I was looking for the one thing people like Grant Holloway almost never imagine exists: leverage. Around 10 that night, I finally found the original county lease agreement, then the engineering drawings, then the easement documents that had been updated years after Eagle Summit was built. Every page told the same story. The neighborhood's central propane storage facility wasn't owned by the HOA. It wasn't owned by the developer either. The entire distribution yard, including the 12,000-gallon storage system, emergency shutoff manifold, maintenance access road, and safety perimeter, sat on a parcel my company leased directly from Carbon Ridge County. The HOA had signed a 20-year fuel service agreement with us years before Grant ever became president. And hidden in that agreement was a simple clause requiring unrestricted commercial access for fuel deliveries and emergency maintenance. I leaned back in my chair and laughed. Not because I wanted revenge, but because Grant had accidentally cut off the only road leading to the system that kept his entire neighborhood functioning. Jake looked over from the garage. "That good?" "Better," I answered. "Tomorrow's going to be educational." The following morning, I drove to the county recorder's office, mostly because I never like relying on memory when lawyers eventually get involved. Carol Benson had worked behind that counter longer than I'd been in business. She recognized me before I even reached her desk. "Morning, Ethan. What trouble are we solving today?" "Hopefully none," I smiled. "I just need certified copies of Parcel 18B and every easement attached to it." 20 minutes later, she slid the folder across the counter. "Everything's still valid. County renewed your lease 3 years ago. No amendments? None." She hesitated before asking, "Something going on?" I just smiled. "Someone's about to learn why reading contracts matters." Before leaving, I stopped by the county engineering department where an old friend named Mark Ellison pulled the infrastructure maps onto a large monitor. He traced the underground propane lines with his finger. "Everything branches from your manifold right here," he explained. "Without this distribution point, none of those homes receive fuel." "There's no secondary connection?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. He shook his head. "No room for one. Mountain terrain. They built the subdivision around your existing system because it saved millions during construction." I thanked him and walked back outside feeling calmer than I had in days. When you know the facts are on your side, anger becomes unnecessary. Grant, meanwhile, seemed to be enjoying himself. Later that afternoon, he drove past our yard in a spotless black SUV, slowed just enough to lower his window, and called out, "Find a smaller truck yet?" I smiled, still working on a solution. He laughed, rolled up the window, and drove away convinced he'd won. Some victories only exist because the other side hasn't realized the game has changed. Over the next 3 days, my crew and I performed what officially appeared to be routine maintenance. We inspected valves, pressure regulators, emergency cutoffs, and distribution piping. Every step was documented with photographs, timestamps, and inspection reports. I hired an independent safety inspector to witness everything because experience had taught me that people who lose arguments often invent new ones. We installed a brand new master isolation valve just inside the property boundary where county regulations clearly allowed maintenance control. Heavy steel posts protected it from accidental vehicle damage. Security cameras covered every angle. Motion sensors recorded activity 24 hours a day. Finally, we replaced the aging gate lock with an industrial security system and posted signs identifying the property as a restricted commercial fuel facility under private lease. Everything was legal. Everything was documented. Everything was boring. Exactly the way lawyers like it. On the 5th morning, I drafted a formal letter addressed to the Eagle Summit HOA board. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't sarcastic. It simply stated that because the association had prohibited commercial vehicles required to service the propane facility, our company could no longer safely perform deliveries or maintenance under the existing conditions. Therefore, all future fuel deliveries were suspended until unrestricted access required under the original service agreement was restored. Copies went to the HOA attorney, the county fire marshal, and the insurance carrier responsible for the fuel system. Linda looked over the letter before mailing it. They're going to lose their minds. Probably, I admitted, but nobody can say we surprised them. 7 minutes after the courier confirmed delivery, my phone rang. Grant didn't bother pretending to be polite this time. "What the hell is this?" he snapped. "A notice," I answered calmly. "You can't suspend service." "Actually, I can. Your board made it impossible to reach the facility with the equipment required under our contract." "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" I asked. "Your own regulations prohibit my trucks." There was silence for several seconds before he finally spoke again. "Drive smaller vehicles." "Grant, one tanker carries enough propane for multiple homes. A pickup truck doesn't. Figure it out." Those were your exact words 3 days ago. I could almost hear him clenching his jaw. "People need heat." "Then remove the restriction." "We're not changing the rule." "Then we're at an impasse." He hung up without another word. Jake had been standing beside me during the conversation. "He's stubborn." "No," I replied. "He's scared. He just doesn't know it yet." The first week passed quietly. Residents assumed the disagreement would disappear. Most never knew deliveries had stopped because the central storage tanks were still nearly full. Grant even sent out a community newsletter bragging that the HOA had successfully reduced commercial traffic and protected neighborhood tranquility. Linda printed it and pinned it to the office bulletin board. Every employee laughed when they read it. "Should we tell him?" one driver joked. "No," I said. "Reality will handle that for us." Around day 9, the phone calls started coming, but not from Grant. Homeowners called asking when the next scheduled refill would arrive because someone had noticed the community tank gauges dropping faster than expected during an unexpected cold front. I politely explained that the HOA board controlled road access and suggested they contact community management for updates. Nobody yelled. Most simply sounded confused. That confusion quickly turned into frustration when nightly temperatures dropped into the teens. Propane consumption nearly doubled. Fireplaces stayed lit longer. Heated driveways ran constantly. Outdoor gathering spaces burned fuel all evening. The reserve level that normally lasted weeks suddenly began disappearing day by day. Inside the Eagle Summit online residence group, arguments exploded. Some blamed the weather. Others blamed poor planning. A retired engineer calculated publicly that if deliveries had actually stopped, the community only had enough propane remaining for another week or so under current conditions. His post disappeared within an hour after moderators deleted it, but screenshots spread faster than they could erase them. By the 12th day, Grant called again. Only this time, the confidence was gone. "Let's be reasonable," he began. "We've got families here." "I know," I answered. "That's why I warned you before anything became urgent. Just make one delivery while we sort this out." "Can my trucks enter legally?" Silence. "Not under the current rule." "Then nothing has changed." His voice hardened again. "People are saying you're holding the neighborhood hostage." "No, Grant. Your board closed the only road to the company responsible for keeping your neighborhood supplied." Before he could interrupt, I continued. "Actions have consequences. Yours just happened to arrive in tanker trucks." He hung up again, but this time I noticed something different. For the first time since we'd met, he no longer sounded like the man in control. By day 16, the entire situation had stopped being a disagreement about truck noise and started becoming a lesson in what happens when pride outruns common sense. Overnight temperatures dropped below 20 degrees, and around sunrise, Jake called me from the yard after checking the remote monitoring data we'd legally received under our maintenance agreement. "They're down to about 22%, he said quietly. I stared at the numbers for a moment before setting my coffee down. "They're going to panic today." He wasn't wrong. Before noon, my phone buzzed non-stop. Except now it wasn't homeowners asking polite questions. It was contractors, plumbers, even a realtor who had heard rumors that Eagle Summit might lose propane service during the coldest week of the month. Grant, meanwhile, was apparently spending his day trying to find another supplier. Later, I learned he had called 3 different propane companies across the state, but every conversation ended the same way. None of them owned the storage system. None of them had legal access to the manifold. None of them could simply connect their trucks to equipment leased by another company without permits, insurance approvals, inspections, and county authorization. Money couldn't fix the problem because the problem wasn't fuel. It was access. That afternoon, Grant showed up at my office in person for the first time. Gone was the pressed smile and the expensive confidence. His coat wasn't even buttoned correctly, and he walked in without waiting for anyone to invite him. "Enough," he said. "Tell me what it'll take." I motioned toward the chair across from my desk. "Sit down." He remained standing. "I'm not here to negotiate," I shrugged. "Then you're here to waste both our time." We stared at each other for several long seconds before he finally sat. I slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a revised service agreement my attorney had prepared the night before. It included guaranteed unrestricted commercial access for all company vehicles, permanent recorded easement protections preventing future road restrictions against fuel deliveries, reimbursement for $23,800 in lost business caused by the suspension, annual infrastructure maintenance contributions from the HOA, mandatory safety inspections funded by the association, and a formal written apology acknowledging that the board's actions had violated the existing service agreement. Grant flipped through the pages, then laughed once. But there wasn't any humor behind it. "This feels like extortion." I leaned back. "No, extortion would have been demanding something you didn't already owe. This is the bill for creating a problem that never needed to exist." He slammed the folder shut. "The board will never approve this." I nodded. "Then I guess you'll all be shopping for electric blankets." He stood up so quickly the chair nearly tipped over. At the door, he stopped and looked back. "People are going to hate you for this." I answered with the same calm I'd carried since the beginning. "No, Grant. They're going to remember who created it." 2 days later, the homeowners revolted exactly the way I suspected they would. Emergency board meetings turned into shouting matches. Residents demanded answers about disappearing propane reserves. Several families had elderly parents living with them. Others had newborn babies. Nobody cared about quieter mornings anymore. They cared about keeping their houses warm. Late on the 19th day, Linda walked into my office holding her phone with a grin she couldn't hide. Wire transfer just came through. 30 seconds later, another email appeared. Then another. Signed agreement. Signed apology. Board resolution removing every commercial vehicle restriction affecting our company. Recorded easement approval. I read every page carefully before calling Jake. "Open the gate," I said. "Let's go to work." 3 tanker trucks rolled into Eagle Summit that afternoon beneath a light snowfall. Nobody applauded. Nobody cheered. Residents simply watched from their driveways while our crew connected hoses, checked pressures, and filled the storage system exactly the way we'd done for years before anyone decided our trucks were too noisy. Grant stood off to one side with his hands buried in his coat pockets. As I finished signing the final inspection report, he walked over slowly. "I should have looked into the contracts first," he admitted, barely above a whisper. I smiled. "You should have talked to the people doing the work before trying to control how they did it." He nodded once. There wasn't much left to say after that. Winter kept moving forward. Our Tuesday deliveries became routine again, and before long, the diesel engines everyone supposedly hated faded back into the background noise of mountain life. Funny how people stop hearing something once they realize it's keeping them comfortable. Looking back now, I don't think the biggest lesson had anything to do with propane or lawyers or HOA politics. It was about respect. Most people who work with their hands aren't asking for special treatment. They're just asking not to be treated like obstacles by people who depend on them every single day without even realizing it. Grant thought he controlled the neighborhood because he controlled the rules. What he forgot was that rules don't create reality. Reality has a habit of reminding you who actually keeps the lights on, the heat running, and the world moving when the weather turns cold. So now I'm curious what you think. Did I go too far by refusing deliveries until the agreement was fixed? Or was that simply the natural consequence of the HOA's own decision? If you had been sitting in my chair, would you have unlocked that gate sooner? Or would you have waited a little longer? Let me know in the comments. Because stories like this always seem to divide people right down the middle. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, an overconfident board, or someone who confused authority with wisdom, share your experience below. Subscribe for more true-to-life community justice stories, and I'll see you in the next one.